Have you ever noticed that in all the leading political parties in Zimbabwe, before and after independence, there has never been a smooth transfer of power? All of them, without exception. Consider this. Robert Mugabe took over control of ZANU scandalously. He would go on to lead that party for 40 years, only to be removed scandalously as well. You live by the sword, you die by the sword. Morgan Tsvangirai was president of the MDC for 19 years. He was only removed by death, and when he died, his 3 vice presidents started fighting to replace him. Joshua Nkomo was president of ZAPU, including the ANC and the NDP, for 30 years. He was only removed when PF ZAPU was swallowed by ZANU PF in 1987. When Washington Mngube took over from Atham Tambara in 2011, the two of them fought, both of them claiming to be the legitimate leader of the MDCM, which later became the MDCN and later still MDC Green. When Douglas Munzora took over from Thokozani Kupe, the two of them fought in 2022. They fought, suspended, fired, and expelled each other. There has never been a smooth transfer of power in any of the leading Zimbabwean political parties before and after independence. This is what makes the ZANU PF succession debacle very interesting. Because you see, unlike the MDC-CCC factional fights, ZANU PF factional fights involve guns and tankers. Factionalism yezanu iri legendary kunge Jeepers, dog eat dog sichas, vachitengisana kunge Judas, and them fake war vets who were actually chimbwidos and mujibas, vanongoti dadamukira kunge ndandia Adidas. Well, fellow Sadza eaters, slay queens and bingers, socialites, papalites, vasnamalites, varikudya rice, nevasnama rights. Welcome to the special report. Now, as a starting point, let me begin by thanking SADC. Yes, you see, because of the upcoming SADC summit in Zimbabwe, there is now a significant level of development on the ground. Of course, the development isn't that much, especially when you juxtapose it with what's happening in other countries. Quite frankly, those who are overly impressed with what's happening on the ground are people who have never left Zimbabwe. But the point is, at least there is action on the ground. I mean, we are seeing an increased pace in road resurfacing, street lights are being installed, even trees are being painted. Yeah. Exterior deco baba. But what saddens me is the fact that the government is doing this just to impress SADC. When are they going to do something to impress Zimbabweans? Imagine if this small progress had started from 2017 when the so-called new dispensation took over. Where would Zimbabwe be today? Well, Zimbabwe will be Zimbabwe and ZANU PF will be ZANU PF. Anyway, let's get back to the topic. Remember, we continue with our topic, our coverage of the ZANU PF succession debacle. Let's start by looking at the leadership of ZANU PF so we can appreciate who is who and who wants what. You have ED as president with his 2 vice presidents, Chiwenga and Mohadi. That is your top 3 right there. The number 4 in charge is the national chairperson, who happens to be Opam Chinguri, who is also the Minister of Defense. The number 5 in charge is the Secretary General, Obet Mpofu. However, Mpofu doesn't really have the full powers of an actual Secretary General. The more appropriate title for Obet Mpofu is a Secretary for Administration. The last proper Secretary General of ZANU PF was Edgar Tekere, who was fired for clashing with Mugabe on policy. Mugabe then dissolved the position of Secretary General and assimilated its powers into his office. That's how he became a president and first secretary of ZANU PF. Mnangagwa inherited these powers. He is also a president and first secretary of ZANU PF. That makes Obet Mpofu a powerless Secretary General. Because the position of Secretary General in its truest form is very powerful. A Secretary General runs all the administrative aspects of the party. That means an SG controls the agenda. An SG is intimately involved in the day-to-day running of the party. So, in many ways, an SG is the operational boss of the party, which explains why SGs end up becoming party presidents. Mugabe himself went straight from a Secretary General to president. In the Soviet Union, when Vladimir Lenin died, Stalin, who was Secretary General, took over. Walshman Nube, as Secretary General, led the first breakaway faction of the MDC in 2005. Tendai Biti, as Secretary General, led another breakaway faction of the MDC in 2013. These splits prompted Tsvangirai to amend the MDC constitution and diluted the powers of MDC Secretaries General. The office of Secretary General is very powerful. That explains the rise of Sengeze Chabangu as a Secretary General. When they did their scheming, they chose the post of Secretary General because of the power that it wields. Obet Mpofu doesn't have much of this power, but officially he is the Secretary General of ZANU PF and number 5 in charge. Number 6 is this guy, Munyaradzi Machacha, the political commissar of ZANU PF. He was also the principal of the Chitepo School of Ideology. Ordinarily, a political commissar is similar to a national organizer, but there is more to it. Political commissars are also responsible for instilling right thinking within the rank and file. They are responsible for political education. They are the custodians of the party ideology. Another big wig who I am carefully not calling number 7 is Jacob Mudenda, or Mudenda as most people call him, who is the Treasurer General of ZANU PF, the post originally held by Emerson Kala when ZANU PF was still ZANU. Mudenda is also the Speaker and Head of Parliament. Another heavyweight who I am also carefully not calling number 8 is Chris Mutsvangwa, the self-proclaimed John Rambo of the liberation struggle. Mutsvangwa is the national spokesperson of ZANU PF. Patrick Chinamasa is another big wig responsible for legal affairs. Douglas Mahia is responsible for the war veterans. Mabel Chinomona is responsible for the Women's League. She is also the president of the Senate. And lastly, Tinoma Chakaire is the youth leader. So, there you have it. These are the Politburo members with influence. They have direct access to the ZANU PF grassroots structures. So, any faction that controls most of these positions effectively controls ZANU PF. But there is a twist. You see, by November 2017, the G40 faction effectively controlled ZANU PF. They'd taken over ZANU PF. And the army stepped in. Within 1 week, the army had reversed everything and the G40 had been completely flushed out of ZANU PF. That tells you that the military is the only structure of ZANU PF with a veto power. And that veto power is exercised by way of guns and tankers. The military establishment is the only structure of ZANU PF that can pull out a joker and ask you to pick 5. Kana vakuti pick 5 and vavati declare kepele juve, kepele skip, kepele clause. So, as we build up to the ZANU PF elective congress in 2027, it's important to keep in mind that controlling ZANU PF structures, be they grassroots or leadership structures, doesn't guarantee you the presidency, at least not in the long term. Already battle lines have been drawn and Mutsvangwa did the unthinkable. He went after the general. Mutsvangwa actually went after the venerated general. What? Can someone please remind Christopher Mutsvangwa what happened to Kudzanai Chipanga in 2017 when he went after the venerated general? I hope Mutsvangwa has access to a good tailor who can knit up an apology upon request, because when the general goes after you, he makes you announce it live on TV. But in all seriousness, Christopher Mutsvangwa knows better. He wouldn't go after General Chiwenga if he didn't have the backing of someone very powerful. The question is, who is backing him? Remember the words of Christopher Mutsvangwa back then when his son got arrested. He said, "There are people in ZANU PF who have organized against me." Was he referring to the Chiwenga faction? Interesting. What is very clear is that the army will definitely have a say on who becomes the next president of ZANU PF. The question is, how much influence does Chiwenga still have in the army? Because the influence of former army generals declines over time. It's the reason why Solomon Mujuru died like a mere commoner. But you know, Solomon Mujuru influenced the rise of his wife to the presidency 12 years after his retirement from the army. 12 years. So, to dismiss General Chiwenga only 5 years after his retirement is a naivety of the highest order. Naivety from the valley of the shadow of utopia and the hills of myopia. Mnenge mamwe bia. Christopher Mutsvangwa further said, ZANU PF is not Makandiwa's church and ED is not the Archbishop of Canterbury who can anoint leaders. He even suggested that Chiwenga was a reluctant participant in the 2017 coup when they got rid of Mugabe. Ladies and gentlemen, pray that the ZANU PF succession goes smoothly. Trust me, it's in your interest, because when elephants fight, it's the grass that suffers. I have just proven to you with historical evidence that we as Zimbabweans, politically, we don't know how to deal with succession. This is true both in ZANU PF and in the opposition. But the ZANU PF factional fights are more dangerous because they affect you and me directly. In my last video, I showed you the extent to which the military is involved in ZANU PF politics. If you haven't watched that video, I highly recommend that you do. Anyway, back to the point. So Mutsvangwa says leaders in ZANU PF are not anointed. And in his actual words, He goes, if you clamor for anointment by the president, it means you have failed the litmus test of being a ZANU PF leader. Well, without realizing it, Mutsvangwa is actually speaking the truth, except not the truth that he intended. He is right in saying that the president is not the anointing power. You see, the litmus test of being a ZANU PF leader is garnering and commanding the confidence of the military. Was it not the army which anointed ED in 2017 after he had actually been fired and expelled from ZANU PF by the previous president? Was it not the army which anointed Mugabe in 1975 via the Mnangagwa Declaration pending the 1977 Chimoyi Congress, which was a foregone conclusion? No one can last as a ZANU PF president without the confidence of the military establishment. Mugabe and Sithole found out the hard way. But what explains the reshuffling exercise that ED has been conducting in the Zimbabwe Defense Forces? Could it be that ED, as a Machiavellian politician, has been trying to recalibrate, reconfigure and realign the military establishment to his plan, whatever that plan is? Because some have been retired, some are being moved to different positions, ranks and departments. Some are mysteriously dying. Could it be that ED is trying to realign the military to his coup-proof plan? Remember, ED has been part of the military establishment for a long time. At independence, he became the first state security minister responsible for intelligence. And when General Peter Walls was fired in mid-1980, ED took over leadership of the military as chairman of the Joint High Command until 1981, when Sandy McLean was promoted to the rank of CDF. ED would later become Minister of Defense, often chairing the Joint Operations Command, not to be confused with the Joint High Command of the early 80s. The Joint High Command was a military structure which incorporated the command element of ZIPRA, ZANLA, and the Rhodesian Security Forces. The Joint Operations Command is a military structure which incorporates all Zimbabwean security forces, that is, the ZDF, police, intelligence, and prison services. So, ED has been deeply involved in all of these. Apart from General Chiwenga, there is no other politician in Zimbabwe who intimately understands the military establishment better than ED. That's what makes it difficult to stage a coup against Emmerson Mnangagwa. Because unlike Robert Mugabe, Emmerson Mnangagwa understands the military at an operational level. Robert Mugabe was not a military man. He was a politician through and through. He never received any military training in his entire life. Emmerson Mnangagwa, on the other hand, is a military man, a trained guerrilla fighter. He is the true definition of started from the bottom, now here. From 1977, he becomes Robert Mugabe's personal assistant and head of security in ZANU PF. He goes on to set up national security policy and structure in his capacity as Zimbabwe's first state security minister. He would become Robert Mugabe's chief enforcer in his 37 years at number 1 Chancellor Avenue. Maybe let me remind you of ED's words in 2023. He said, and here I'm quoting him verbatim, "I have been Minister of State Security for a long time, so most of the systems in Zimbabwe, I created them. So they always remember who their godfather is. If you plan against me, I get to know. These are the words of Emmerson Dambudzo Mnangagwa. Don't you for a second underestimate him. He wasn't Robert Mugabe's chief enforcer for nothing. But let me tell you one thing. There are people under the radar who are always up to something. So whether Mnangagwa steps down or stays on, it's one and the same thing. Pray that the transition is a peaceful chapter, because when elephants fight, it's the ants that suffer. And as always, thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoy the content, please like and share.